First of all, welcome to the Centre for European Reform. I'm Ian Bond, I'm the Deputy Director, and I'm delighted today that we are joined by Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats and their Treasury spokesperson. So, just over a year ago, you had your best election result since the Liberal Democrats as such were formed in 1988. Now the third largest party in the House of Commons, and of the mainstream parties, by far the most EU friendly. So in the 2024 manifesto, the party promised to fix the UK's broken relationship with Europe through a four-stage plan culminating in seeking to join the EU single market with the longer-term aim of rejoining the EU. Music to my ears, I must say. But meanwhile, the Labour government has stuck to this mantra of no return to the single market, no return to the customs union, no return to freedom of movement. And despite those red lines, the relationship has significantly improved. I mean, it would have been hard to get worse than it was under the previous government, but it's certainly improved quite significantly. And we had the first EU-UK summit in May. Various agreements were reached. Some of them were only agreements to talk some more, but some of them were more concrete than that. But I suppose the question is whether what has been done so far is an adequate reflection both of the UK's economic needs and of the gravity of the security situation in Europe. So we thought it would be very interesting to get a Liberal Democrat perspective on that. I mean, you have covered a wide range of briefs in the Lib Dems since you entered Parliament in 2019. But now, on the Treasury side and as Deputy Leader, I think you'll have a fairly wide view on this. It is an on-the-record discussion. We will be posting this on our website later, so please bear that in mind in your comments and questions. And I'll give the floor to you for 7 or 8 minutes of introductory remarks, and then I'll open the floor for questions and comments.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ian. Thank you, John, for initial introduction and invitation, and to the Centre for European Reform for organising today's event. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I thought I would start with last week. I thought I would start with President Macron's address to Parliament, because I felt it was a very significant moment. And there was one remark in particular that really got me in the gut. And that was when he said that he reminded us that he is the first European leader to be invited on a state visit to the UK since the Brexit vote. And that fact alone, the fact that not a single European leader has been invited here, that fact alone speaks to the enormous damage that Brexit did to our diplomatic relations, even before you get to our economic ties, our defence ties, our cultural ties, or anything else. And when President Macron made that remark, there was a ripple of noise amongst the MPs and the peers. And it was fascinating that it was that remark that created this ripple of noise. And for me, it reminded me of that pang of loss that many of us had when we saw the results come in 2016. And when he outlined the fact that a European leader had not been here in 9 years on a state visit, it just for a moment, and I think many people in the audience amongst MPs and peers really were reminded about the loss of influence that we have in one of the world's largest trading blocs, the loss of standing on the international stage, the loss of opportunity for young people, and the loss of identity in our shared history. And President Macron was very keen to emphasise that shared history. And he urged us all to make sure that we didn't lose sight of the fact that we had worked together to shape the international order after the Second World War. And that to me felt like a very poignant and timely reminder. So I think the fact that Macron was here was hugely symbolic. What we hear as a Liberal Party from across Europe and from our sister parties is there is a very welcome change in tone. There is a relief that the relationship between the UK and the EU is now more civil and more constructive. But there is a but. And the but is that there is no real meat on the bones yet. And that is a source of enormous frustration. So we, as a Liberal Democrat Party, we want this government to do well. We want this government, like every government, we want every government to do well. But we're not living in a stable world. And therefore, these sort of technocratic developments happening at a very slow pace is just not good enough. We have a sort of geopolitical imperative to grasp the nettle. And we want to see this Labour government going full throttle. We need to see a timeline for the SPS deal. We want to see the government set a goal of creating a bespoke customs union. We wish that they had already announced the details of a youth mobility scheme rather than just a vague intention to have one. I think the UK-France returns deal, well, I think it's welcome, but let's see how quickly they can scale up the trial. I think people will rightly be sceptical about whether or not it will succeed. We want to see associate membership of the European Defence Agency. We want to see access to the SAFE Fund. We want to see associate membership of the European Defence Agency because our security and our prosperity depends on it. And one thing I'll say with my Treasury hat on is that this government repeatedly says that growth is its #1 goal. Growth is its #1 goal. I think many of us can point to things the government has done to undermine that ambition of getting to growth. But we have a trading relationship with the EU sitting right there for the taking, a deeper trading relationship. The government should be grasping that with both hands, and it is deeply frustrating to us as the Liberal Democrats that they are not doing so. So I shall leave my opening remarks there for now, and we'll explore some of that hopefully in Q&A.
Great, okay, those are admirably brief opening remarks. I'm going to abuse the chair's privilege and just ask you about one thing, because you highlighted there the customs union. The manifesto highlights the objective of joining the single market. And I wondered, have you changed your minds, or why do you see one as a higher priority than the other?
Well, there are two things. I mean, the first thing is we're talking about a bespoke customs union between the UK and the EU, not the customs union, a bespoke customs union. And there are two reasons we're talking about this. The first is, I think we should all learn the lesson from the Brexit days, from the Brexit wars, that we have to take the country with us. I think that's really, really important. We need to be able to demonstrate that our relationship with the EU can be strengthened in the interests of the UK. And the second thing, I think, is that any further progress is simply not on the table. If you look at some of the things that the UK and the EU are discussing at the moment, they are far off even having a bespoke customs union, let alone anything further. So, you know, many of us may want to say we would want to start from here, but the fact is that we are starting from here. And given where we are starting, we think that this is an achievable goal, that it could be achieved within the government's own red lines, as they have set out. We don't necessarily agree with those red lines, but the government has set out red lines. And so even within the government's own red lines, it would be possible to get this bespoke customs union. And our research, aided by House of Commons, our House of Commons library research, which we commissioned, shows that in the long term, if you could get that customs union, that would be an additional £25 billion per year once that agreement is settled. And so if the government is after growth, this is a clear and obvious way of getting it.
Very good. Right, I will open the floor. If you have questions in the room, just raise your hand. If you have questions online, you can either raise your electronic hand, in which case we will unmute you so you can ask your question, or you can post it in the chat, in which case I will read it out if you're not in a place where you can ask your question yourself. So, and I already have a question from Raphael Bear. So if we can unmute Raphael. Can we?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
So just in the very last thing you said there, you mentioned not necessarily agreeing with the government's red lines. And I think probably the key driver of why the government has those red lines is anxiety about immigration and migration. You mentioned also wanting to sort of push a little bit harder on the youth mobility scheme. I'd be interested to know, I mean, Liberal Democrat voters are also very worried about immigration, and you operate domestically with sort of the same constraints that the government has on this particular issue. So just any sense of how far you think that the dial can be nudged in a domestic conversation about immigration so it changes the conversation about relations with the EU?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So the first thing I would say is that most polling suggests that the British public have actually got a fairly sophisticated and nuanced understanding of immigration. They don't see it as just numbers in and numbers out, which is what some politicians want to talk about. But actually, the British public are more discerning about that, and they do recognise that there are benefits and there are pressures. And when you speak to most people about, do you think that young people should have the opportunity to travel and to work and to live abroad, and should there be a youth mobility scheme for people, that it's vastly popular amongst all sections of our society. We also have the proof point that these schemes exist already for lots of young people from countries that are not within the EU. And I think it's a question of leadership for the government to make the point that this youth mobility scheme would be a good thing for young people in this country. It'd be a good thing for our economy, and it can be treated separately from the broader immigration debate.
Good, thank you very much. Yeah, Mike Rake.
Yeah, I mean,
do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, Mike Rake. I'm board member of CER, and previously various business activities, which I still have, and was very much on the Remain side. I mean, briefly, Daisy, and not to overstate it, it's 9 years since we left the European Union. The public have generally become aware, almost by process of osmosis, that it was a big mistake and they would like to. But it's not really been elevated to the level, in my view, it should be, as the biggest single act of self-harm economically and reputationally in our modern history. And actually, if this was a business, it'd be accused of fraud because of an irreversible constitutional change. Actually, it was a minority of the population who voted. And I think 75% of 18 to 30 voted to stay. So by way of backdrop, I think a lot of us don't understand why, in order to put pressure on the government to be bolder, to speak the truth, put country over party, as they said they would do, to justify growth, then we have been clearer about the real damage that's been done economically, pound, shilling, and pence, if we had them again, who knows, you know, to our economy, even to the last year, to the debt. And it's kind of frustrating. There seems to be a conspiracy of silence around the realities of this and what business would be facing on such a false prospectus and such damage. And therefore, you know, to really raise this profile, honestly, it's now 9 years. I mean, OBR, I think this last year probably cost us in fiscal revenues 40 billion. I mean, this is incredible. And we're not talking about a 20 billion deficit here. We're talking about hundreds of billions. If you go through all the factors of underinvestment over the last many years in healthcare and infrastructure, in roads, in the military, name it, whatever you want. So my question is it possible, you know, as obviously Lib Dems, the only people who've got this right all the way through. You know, is there a way to be louder and put more pressure, both privately and publicly? You know, there are roles that could be taken to really put the Atlantic stand. There's no reason why we could have just stayed in the customs union. It was missed by one vote in Parliament. This is all nonsense at any level to even be discussing it. We should have stayed in the customs union. Turkey doesn't seem pretty independent to me. So I don't know, I don't want to bang on, but it's just this issue of raising at this point where we're facing a real crisis, economically, financially, politically. This is a great opportunity. You know, one would like to see the Tories are discredited totally. I don't want to talk about it. I'd love to see the Lib Dems, you know, really take this one up strongly.
Well, I'm here for a reason, Mike. Let me say 2 or 3 things about that. So the first thing is, I imagine the reason we're all here is because we're all of a similar mind, that we think that enormous damage has happened as a result of the botched Brexit deal, and that all of us want to see a closer relationship. So we're all of one mind in this room, but there are many people not in this room who are not of that mind. I think that as a political party, if you want to make and win the argument, you have to first make sure that people are prepared to listen. And when I go knocking on doors, which I do not every single week, but almost every single week, people's lives are in a real state of crisis, like a real state of crisis. And when people can't see a GP and they can't get a special educational needs assessment for their child, or they're having to leave their job to look after mum or dad or a cousin or anybody else, the idea that having a strong relationship with Europe is the answer feels very removed for a lot of people. And so many of us would make these sort of intellectual argument, well, if you have a trading relationship with Europe, you get more growth, and with more growth, you can get more tax, and that helps to get the public sector back on its feet. But that's a number of steps. And so it's quite tricky to make that argument, I think, for some people. At the same time, I think that if we are serious about getting a stronger deal with the EU, and we do need to be, we need to be negotiating from a position of strength. And at the moment, we are not in a position of strength as a country. We're in a right old muddle, and I think we can all see that. And so I think the imperative straight away has to be that the government needs to negotiate something that demonstrates it is in Britain's interest. A youth mobility scheme would do that. A bespoke customs union that helped British businesses would help with that. And I think one of the things we should recognise and point at the Tories for is that if we don't negotiate our way into various schemes, we're going to have to pay our way in instead, and it's going to be more expensive. And you just need to look at the Erasmus programme, the Horizon programme, where the Conservatives paid, Conservative government paid for us to join the Horizon scheme because we didn't negotiate our way in, and that will just continue
because we missed the opportunity.
Exactly. So I think that it's really imperative that we can show that there are things that we can negotiate that will be beneficial to Britain. And what I really worry about at the moment is that the deal that has been struck, it's all about intentions. The only concrete thing to come out of the deal between the EU and the UK recently was us giving away our fishing rights for 12 years. Everything else that could be in our benefit has not got actual details attached to it. It's all intention stuff. And that, I think, is a real misstep by the government. And I think they really need to grasp the nettle and demonstrate how working with Europe can give us benefits to this country, whether it's to businesses, whether it's to young people. That gives us, I think, the base upon which to then talk about the broader relationship. And the government needs to do it quickly, because as I said before, there is a geopolitical imperative, and I remember saying this even at the time of the referendum. For me personally, it wasn't about a big European identity. I haven't travelled or lived around much of Europe, but for me, it was always about our place in the world, and seeing the rise of Russia and China, and Trump 1.0, but now I'm 2.0. Even back then, it was a question about, for me, it was a question about our place in the world. And that has become far more acute right now. And so we need to make the case and demonstrate the benefits so that we can then develop that deeper relationship.
I think the Labour government is rightly, in my view, focused on sectoral integration in three areas: electricity trading, SBS, and emissions trading scheme. It's essentially going back into the single market and accepting the principle of dynamic alignment and a role for border justice. That's good. It's probably going to go for a few more sectors soon, but at a certain point, they will say, hang on, what about freedom of movement? There's a limit to how many sectors we can integrate, rejoin the single market without the EU saying, we give the Swiss freedom of movement, so we have to demand the same from you. What is the Liberal view on freedom of movement? Is it an absolute red line for Liberals, or could you see a softening of the British position on that if you had it your way?
I just don't think it's even on the table right now. I mean, you said the integration of these three issues, but SPS, there isn't even a negotiating mandate for SPS. There isn't even a timeline for achieving an SPS agreement. And as a very first step, I think we see right here, right now, the Labour government needs to agree a timeline for getting to that SPS agreement, because otherwise we could still be negotiating it in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time. And I don't think any of us can imagine where the world is going to be in 5 years' time, let alone in 10 years' time. So what I'm interested in is the right here, the right now. What could the government be doing today? And I think they should be far more ambitious about getting that SPS agreement, because it's a huge frustration and concern to agri businesses in this country. But I think talking about things like single market, freedom of movement, at the moment that feels to me like almost like a never argument. We've set out our ambition in our manifesto. We are the most pro-European party, but we have got to get action now, and that's what we really want to see.
Just to follow up on that, do you think there is enough willingness on the European side? I mean, some of these things require the Commission to get a mandate from the member states.
Mm-hmm.
You're still a member of ALDE as a kind of umbrella group.
Yeah.
Do you think your European sister parties are pushing equally hard on the European side for improvements in these sorts of areas?
Yes, they are. So James McCleary, who's the MP for Lewis and our Europe spokesperson, just last week came back from the Renew conference, and which includes which includes ALDE. And when he came back, he sort of said to me that they welcome the change of tone. They themselves have said it is more civil, more constructive. But like us, they have a real frustration, and they're a bit bemused. They're a bit bemused that we didn't demand more out of the deal. And so they're ambitious for us, and we should be more ambitious for ourselves. And I think we are all of one mind when it comes to that. But I mean, James, as our Europe spokesperson, has been making these connections with Liberal parties around the EU. Because we are now a larger party, we have the capacity to do that. And we want to make sure that we work closely with them so that we can get pressure around Europe for the closer relationship, whether that's on defence, whether it's on youth mobility, whether it's on SBS or anything else, quite frankly.
Great, right. So I have a question online from Eka Yakubashvili from the Open Society Foundation. Do the Lib Dems have a plan and a proposition for what it would look like to bring the UK back into a leadership role in the current reality? It's clear the UK will not be going back to the EU, and any conversation and regurgitating on the glorious past may not actualize, may not become a reality, I guess. So, do you have a plan for putting us in a leadership role? Should we even be thinking in terms of a leadership role, or is a bit of a humility sometimes not a bad thing?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess what I would say is we're 11 months in to a new parliament, and it is for the government to demonstrate what it's able to achieve and what it wants to achieve. But there's two things we can do. The first is, as a party of constructive opposition, is we need to hold the government's feet to the fire and push them to go further and faster. And I've outlined many of the ways in which we hope the Labour government will do that. But I think in terms of a leadership role, obviously we are outside the EU, we are a third country, right? So that in itself limits what kind of leadership role we might be able to show. But we have said that we think we should be negotiating our way into the SAFE fund, around security. We think we could be working together, with a customs union. I think that would show leadership as well in terms of closer economic ties. There are plenty of things the government could be doing, and I don't sound like a stuck record, but at the moment, given what we have, talking about a bespoke customs union, a youth mobility scheme, being associates of the European Defence Agency, these are all big, bold, ambitious things. They may not feel like it for those who want us to be full members of the EU, but these are big, bold, ambitious things that the government is not currently pursuing, and will continue to push them to do so.
Right. Okay. I'll take Orla.
Thank you. Orla McBreen from the Embassy of Ireland. One of the outcomings of the EU case summit is more structure in the relationship, so annual summits. And maybe one of the losses of Brexit is that officials at all levels in all ministries aren't seeing their European counterparts. Is that something yourselves and the wider ALDE group are conscious of, and do you have any ideas on what might be done in that area?
Yeah. Well, as I said at the very beginning, I was shocked even on a political level. I think your point is more about the diplomatic level, but even at the political level, the very fact that it's taken 9 years, even for a European leader to be invited here on a state visit, is quite astonishing. I think we kind of all knew it, but it sort of took someone to say it for it to sort of sink in terms of how profound that missed opportunity has been. On the diplomatic level, I mean, we need to strengthen ties on every level, security, defence, diplomatic, cultural, on every single level. What we have noticed as a political party is that our political counterparts around Europe are very keen to engage. They are delighted that we have someone who is a dedicated Europe spokesperson, who is reaching out, making those links, so that we can make sure that politically we are all aligned in calling for closer cooperation on defence, on growth, on our economic ties, our cultural ties, and everything else. And if that can be replicated at the diplomatic level, then yes, that's fantastic too.
Okay. Now I have a sort of hospital pass from Alexis Rotti, who's a student at the University of Sorbonne Nouvelle. The Lib Dem position would be ultimately to seek to rejoin the EU in the long term. An article in The Guardian published yesterday said that 54% of Britons said they supported rejoining the EU versus 34% who opposed it. In the four largest EU countries, support for a return of the UK to the EU remains broad, but those countries would oppose the UK returning with its previous opt-outs from Schengen and the euro. Should those circumstances be red lines for the EU? In polling in the UK, support for rejoining the EU dwindles to 35%, compared with 45% who would oppose rejoining. How do the Lib Dems feel on potentially having to drop these previous opt-outs should EU membership be the long-term goal? So Schengen or euro, or not Schengen and euro?
Look, I'm going to disappoint everybody with these long-term questions, because these things are just not on the table right now. They're just not on the table. If you think about the deal that was negotiated just the other week, there's barely any meat on the bones as it is. Talking about something that might happen, you know, in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years time. I mean, it's just never, right? We cannot work out what the world will look like then. I fear what the world will look like in a few months' time, let alone in a few years' time. What I can say about the percentages of people that want to join and, you know, rejoin or leave, whatever have you, I think there's a few things I would say. The first is I'm always slightly skeptical of this polling, because this polling is outside of a campaign, and polling in peacetime, as we call it, in electoral terms, is very different from polling in wartime. So when there is a live campaign and there are people actively campaigning to you know, get in or get out or what have you, whatever it might be, during a general election or a referendum, the polling changes significantly based on the messaging, based on the state of the economy, based on how people feel at the time, and what message they want to send to the government of the day, and the context within which that's happening. So I think any kind of percentages like that do need to be taken with at least a pinch of salt. The second thing I would say is, obviously, if the government follows through on its commitments for votes at 16, then of course we're seeing more and more younger people coming through. 9 years ago, we knew that a lot of young people were in favour of Remain during the referendum. Given what's happening on social media and the number of young people who are being attracted by Nigel Farage and Reform, I don't know whether that's still the case or not, but we need to be very mindful of that. And in terms of, you know, what any kind of future deal, you know, would look like, all I would say is, I think even asking the question about what would even be in a deal and what red lines there would be and what we would give up, that is completely the wrong end of the telescope to start at. The question is, how do we persuade British people that a stronger relationship with the European Union is in their interests and make a difference to their lives? And the details of what it looks like is of secondary order. And I don't think that collectively those of us who want a closer relationship with Europe have even made that case. For me, as I said before, it has always been about our standing in the world. It has always been about the geopolitical imperative. It also needs to be about growth, and making sure that any growth that does come then reflects in terms of growth that benefits everybody in the country. And there's a lot of work, I think, for this government to do to be able to demonstrate that some of the things that are achievable right now will tangibly improve the lives of people. And if we can demonstrate that something will tangibly improve their lives, then we can start to win the argument. But I think technocratic arguments about opt-outs at some point in the future will not persuade anybody to change their minds.
Okay, I'm going to follow straight up with a question from Martin Donnelly, the former Permanent Secretary in the Department of Trade and Industry.
Sure.
Which I think goes to what you were just saying about making the case. So Martin asks, would it be helpful for UK and EU experts to produce a shared analysis of the mutual benefits of UK entry into a customs union, so that the debate can take place on the basis of clear evidence?
Yes, I think that would be a fantastic idea. I like that idea a lot. As I said, you know, we Liberal Democrats commissioned research from the House of Commons Library, which showed that in the long term, even a bespoke customs union that is within the government's existing red lines could produce £25 billion of extra revenue for the public purse every single year. If there was a joint document setting out the benefits both to the UK and the EU, I think that would be a fantastic step forward. So I'm all in favour. Thumbs up.
Great. Okay. I'll take a question from John Kerr.
One very difficult question from Paris, from Mr. Rotti.
You've never asked me an easy question,
I think
John.
he cheated slightly by putting Schengen and the euro in the same box. I personally think it would be a very good thing to join Schengen. I thought we should have joined Schengen a very long time ago with our Irish friends. But whether that becomes politically possible depends on whether the Lib Dem party succeed in having a grown-up debate in Britain about immigration. And I don't know. The euro is a completely different question. I think there is absolutely no question that if, I agree this is not for now, if the British came saying they were very sorry, they'd like to join again, they would not be obliged to do more than make a, when the time is right, declaration about the euro, the kind that we made long, long ago about joining the ERM. On the here and now, and your point about things that should be done now, I thought the reset was a good first step, but I was disappointed that it contained nothing on artists, musicians, and nothing on recognition of qualifications. I think I deduce, you may know better than me, that the reason for this was we were so conservative and constipated on youth exchanges. I think it's quite right. The Lib Dem party are pressing for progress on youth exchanges. I think these things go together. I understand we are working up a proposal. Would the Lib Dems go public with their proposal and what it says about the university sector? Because it seems to me that probably the reason why the Treasury are so slow to come round to the idea of youth exchanges is the cost of the reduction in universities' income if university students from the continental Europe paid only the domestic rent for university fees. What's the Lib Dem position on that? Because I agree with you that it's important in itself. I think it's the key to unlocking quite a lot more, but it seems to, I think, to be stuck on the money. How do you solve that?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I would disaggregate the two issues because I don't think they are connected. On the youth mobility scheme, we have a number of youth mobility schemes that exist already with a number of different countries, and I think it's roughly about 20,000 students a year. I think that are exchanged across all of the different programs that we have with Japan, Korea, other countries. We have said that it should be a capped scheme. We don't want to say what the cap should be because that's obviously up for negotiation as part of the detail. But what we do want to see is for the government to actually just agree the flipping scheme, right? I mean, yeah, announcing their intention to get to a scheme is just so tentative. And there's no reason why the government couldn't have got as far as actually announcing the scheme when, as part of the deal the other week. More broadly about universities, I think there is a separate but much bigger issue facing our universities, and that is around obviously university financing. Part of that is around students. We've always said, and I said it during the TV debates last year, that we would take international students out of immigration figures. But I think there is a much bigger question about how we save our universities. They are, fantastic for our economy. They're also one of our biggest exports as well. We should be very proud of our British universities. But there is a question about how, with R&D, we can use the research that's coming out of universities better to inform, science and innovation. I think that's a broader question. So I wouldn't want to just treat the numbers sort of on their own. There's a broader question about the sustainability of universities and how you can change the model to make sure that the research that they're doing is recognised financially from the people who are using their research.
Hello, Andrew Pilgrim from EY. I was just really interested in your thinking on this bespoke customs union point and convincing the UK populace of it, particularly given I suppose the UK's current narrative is we've got a a slight sweetheart deal with the US versus Europe. We proceeded to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've got a deal with India. Would you see the convincing of the British public having to effectively discount those relationships in favour of Europe, or is that something that there's some magic whereby we could maintain all of it?
Yeah. So we have said we think it's entirely possible that you could have a closer trading relationship with the EU through this bespoke customs union, and at the same time maintain a trading relationship with the US, but would be primarily on services. And I think it's entirely compatible to have those two things. And any higher potential tariffs on UK manufacturing and goods would be more than compensated for by having a closer trading relationship with Europe. And so that fundamentally is the argument. I think there are broader arguments why a closer trading relationship with Europe is a good idea, about alignment, about integration, about supply chains, all those other broader arguments as well. I think they're quite technical for ordinary folk. People in manufacturing will understand those arguments, but I think that we can make that case, and we continue to try and do so.
Okay, very good. Now I have a question online from Marcus Meyer from the City of London Corporation's Brussels office. So if we can unmute Marcus.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Perfect. Well, I just have one question around services. So in the current framework, and by the way, also in the many of the points that you proposed at your entry statement, services and financial services in particular is a little bit a blind spot. So, I mean, that's interesting in the first place that in two service-based economies, we speak a lot about goods trades and not so much about services. But how do we get services and how do we get financial services on the agenda? And what would the Liberal Democrats think about it, and what would they propose?
Yeah. So you're right. It's you call it a blind spot. I mean, you're right that I haven't mentioned it. I think it's because it generally doesn't tend to feature that much in the public debate about our relationship with the EU, but it does feature in the political debate, and that's a distinction that I would draw. So obviously, as a country, a huge amount of our economy stems from financial and professional services. We remain a hub. Many people predicted there would be a huge demise of our global hub status after the Brexit vote. We do recognise, of course, that there are many financial organisations that have moved some jobs abroad, but we have managed to maintain that status, and it's critical to our economy that we do. When I speak to your organisation and to other organisations, the thing they want us to talk about most is about the mutual recognition of qualifications, and that's definitely something that I think is incredibly important. But the distinction I would draw is I think that's very important politically for those, particularly for those people who are in the room doing the negotiations. Bizarrely, it doesn't really feature that much in the public debate, but certainly for those of us in Westminster, it is very, very important, and we do recognise how important it is.
I mean, do you think there is going to be a continuing drift of jobs away from the city, or do you think we've kind of reached an equilibrium?
I don't have a crystal ball.
No.
So I don't know. I think if we manage to demonstrate that the UK will have access to other European finance initiatives, particularly on defence, then I think we can do our very best to protect the status that we have. I think that if various financial instruments are set up in Europe at a time when there's a lot of investment into defence in particular, and if we don't have access to those, then I think there is a risk that we continue to drift and we miss out on the next wave of financial roles that are created. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think it comes down to the level of ambition of the current government. And I think we have to be very, very careful. We can't just sit on our laurels and expect that London will always be a home. It will always be we want to live and work in Britain, because we are a fantastic country and London is a great place and surrounding areas to live. So there will always be a hub here, but we can't take it for granted. And I think that the government needs to be more ambitious about negotiating access to those financial instruments and mechanisms, and the rearmament fund and all the rest of it, in order that we can bolster the city here.
Okay. Very good. Right, I have a question from former MEP Sir Graham Watson. Gibraltar has just pulled off a remarkable agreement which makes it effectively part of Schengen without being part of the EU. Might the same be beneficial for Northern Ireland and perhaps even a model one day for the whole of the UK?
Interesting question. So the first thing I would say is we had a delegation of Liberal Democrat MPs that were in Gibraltar, not last week, I think the week before. And what was interesting was that for them, this was existential. This was absolutely existential. They were facing barriers that would have just destroyed their economy overnight. And if they hadn't got the agreement they did within a matter of months, it would have decimated their economy. So I'm pleased then that they did. I wouldn't dare speak on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland. I think it's, I wouldn't dare to do that. I think the focus at the moment, I think, has to be on our economic and defence security before we start talking about any broader issues. I've tried to articulate the areas where I think we can push the government and the areas where I think the government could go further within its own red lines, whether that's on musicians, whether it's on the availability scheme and all the rest of it. But as I say, I think Gibraltar has particular circumstances that meant it was vital for them. I can't see that happening here anytime soon.
Right, right. I mean, sorry, this is a question slightly off to one side, but just on the Gibraltar agreement, will the UK Parliament have an input into that? I mean, there's been so much debate here over the Chagos deal and so on. Is Gibraltar also going to be debated in Parliament, or is this pushed off to the side because it's too difficult?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, it's quite possible that it might be, but it's not on the parliamentary agenda for this week. I suppose there might be other people who want to hold debates in Parliament. I don't know.
The members of the House of Lords, is it coming up on?
No, it won't come to the International Agreements Committee. It will go to the European Affairs Committee if it does. That's for the government to decide whether to subject it to CRAG.
Right.
And there was a Spanish need for 20,000 workers a day goes from Spain into Gibraltar. So
yeah. No, I mean there's a mutual benefit.
This wasn't a great gift, out of the King of Spain after his dinner with the King. No.
Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah. So it's entirely optional whether it comes to Parliament at all. It's up to the government to decide.
Well, the Chagos was optional too, but the government decided to subject it to CRAG, and therefore it had to come to the International Agreements Committee of the House of Lords, because that's what the government's agreement to that effect involves. It did not involve a procedure in the House of Commons.
Right, understood. Thank you. Okay, yes, please.
Embassy of Switzerland, thank you very much, very interesting. I'm not going to ask anything about the EU because we have our own little discussions going on there, but just interested to know, because I've been reading up on some of the economic figures of the UK. So productivity is one of the I think one of the major issues, which of course is related to trade and all that. But what do you see domestically as a sensible way forward in terms of policy measures to address the somewhat, I guess, modest productivity gains in the country, which would translate into real benefits for the economy?
Sure. There are two or three things. The first is our infrastructure is creaking at the seams in this country. If you just look at the commuting times of British people, the British workers, it's much longer than it is for workers in most other European places. I think the use of AI and machine learning is something that this government is quite keen to do, and they're looking at how to incorporate that both into the public sector and to the private sector. When it comes to productivity, there is a real case for investing in our public services. There's a lot of people who end up can't work because their public services aren't working, so they just stop working altogether to look after loved ones. The informal care economy in this country has just ballooned, so that's a huge issue as well. So infrastructure, AI, public services. I think there are questions about our tax regime and whether our tax regime actually incentivizes productivity. One of my bugbears, without being getting too much into the weeds, is around the business rate system We have a crazy situation in this country where if you invest in your own bricks and mortar company to make it more productive or to improve the energy efficiency of it, you end up paying more tax. And so there are questions around both the investment in the infrastructure, which is a longer term issue, but also about our tax regime as well. So there are big questions, but I think it's there isn't a silver bullet to solving productivity, but there are a number of different challenges there.
Great. Okay, I'll take one from online, and then I'll take Lisa. So online, this is from Franklin Steves of E3G. The current US administration has been clear about its plans to withdraw from European security structures, and there are open questions about its commitment to NATO. In this context, would a national security framing be more effective in mobilizing both public and elite support for closer relations with and eventually rejoining the EU than the current economic and social framing?
Partly agree, partly disagree. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that irrespective of whether people want to rejoin the EU or not, we have got to have a closer defence relationship with the EU. I mean, that is absolute imperative. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. And we should be making that case to the country, notwithstanding any broader debate about our relationship with Europe. We have to make the case for that. As I've said before, we would like the UK to have associate membership of the European Defence Agency. We would like to see European countries working together to see the release of frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine win the war, because our own security for the whole of Europe depends on that. We would like the UK government to negotiate a role as part of the SAFE fund as well, to have joint defence procurement. I'm not quite sure how that would happen as a third country, but there has to be a way, I think, to try and make that happen that is compatible with what the European Commission may want of us. So I think that framing the imperative of working with our European neighbours on defence for our own security and the security of Europe as a whole must be an argument that the government makes and hopefully wins, irrespective of our border relationship.
Right, so Elisa Fenley from
SSE, which is an energy company. So on energy and climate, the summit in May delivered very good result, was a major step forward. But now, as you say, we need actions to implement these decisions. And energy is often not only about trade, but also about energy security, cooperation with renewable energy, energy affordability. So do you see these in areas of priority for the government? Do you think that negotiations now can move fast? And what could be the barriers that you see in moving this cooperation with the EU?
Yeah, great. So I think, let me answer it from a different angle, if that's all right. The political context here in the UK is that those people who used to deny climate change was real have lost the argument, but they now claim that we can't afford to tackle the climate emergency and that the cost of tackling the climate emergency will fall on the shoulders of those who are least able to pay. And so in terms of getting political support in this country for taking really bold climate action, we all have to be able to demonstrate that not only is it the right thing for the planet, but it can actually reduce people's bills as well. And that's a political argument that we need to win in this country as a step that's required before we even pursue things with the EU. So for our part, we have constantly said, you know, we have to have an absolute revolution in renewables. I was active in the last Parliament campaigning for the lifting the ban on onshore wind turbines, and you know, it goes on in that vein. The government is doing quite a lot at the moment to try to improve this. A lot of it is not being seen, but there are real problems about the speed at which various companies can join the network. The DNO connections are very, very slow. And a number of businesses that I've spoken to, whether it's food production companies that want to make the transition from gas ovens to electric ovens to make their biscuits, or their food, or whether it's EV charging companies. There's a company based in my constituency that is the premier owner of all forecourts, petrol stations, and they want to turn them all to becoming EV charging locations across the UK, and there's enormous barriers in making that happen. So there's a question here at home about pace. But in terms of working with the rest of Europe, I think we have to work together. There are big questions about the infrastructure and the security, not least in terms of cables, and how we can, underground, undersea. But for us as a party, tackling the climate emergency should be a priority of this government, and we would love to see them do far more when it comes to working with Europe to guarantee our collective energy security.
You want a second bite at the cherry?
I do. I want to get Daisy to be speculative and look at the future. I want to cheat. I want to ask whether, when you look at the polls, which seem to suggest that in England, the next parliament might contain 4 substantial parties, and in Scotland, 5 substantial parties. Looking back at the experience of coalition, many good things were achieved by the Lib Dems, not for the thing they probably most wanted. But you were severely punished. No bounce back, big time. What's your thinking about coalitions? And with whom would you enter a coalition if we had a parliament containing 4 large parties?
I wish I had a fiver for every time somebody asked me that question, because if so, I would be able to fund my next general election campaign very ably. So first thing to say, so the next general election, I think, on the current trajectory is going to be incredibly messy, because our system of first past the post is not built for a 4 or 5 party system. And I imagine there could be a lot of surprises in a lot of places, with parties winning on 25–28% of the vote. And so based on the current trajectory, it's anyone's guess as to what on earth could happen in a first past the post system. And I imagine that politics between now and then will change significantly, both globally and domestically. And so I think anybody who has any idea what the outcome of the next general election will be, I mean, goodness me, I personally haven't got a clue, and I quite like making guesses about these kind of things, but I honestly haven't got a clue. In terms of anything that happens after the next general election, we don't answer that question for a very clear reason, that we never take voters for granted in that kind of way. And at a time when trust in politics is so low, I think showing that kind of what could be portrayed as arrogance about assuming a particular electoral outcome, I think would be very, very damaging. What I think we did very well last year is that we spoke to people's everyday concerns. The number one issue that we heard on the doorstep was around the NHS and around the care system and how everything was broken. And we spoke to that issue very, very clearly, on the doorstep, in our leaflets, on national media, and the British public responded to that. And so I think the lesson, if any lesson, there's any lesson that we need to learn, it's that mainstream parties need to listen to what ordinary people are struggling with in their everyday lives and give them answers that speak to those issues. And I think if you look at the Democrats in America, I think the Democrats became unstuck because they fell into the culture war traps, and they used quite extreme language around Donald Trump's politics that didn't serve them well. And I think that we have to, in order to demonstrate to the public that we're on their side, we have to stick to the issues that matter most to them. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Okay, I think I've got a couple more questions.
Sure.
One more in the room. Okay, let me take one of the ones online, which is from a former Foreign Office colleague of mine, Michael Davenport. As you said, rejoining the customs union is a politically very ambitious project. It will be important to harness all the strong arguments, but it will also be vital to put together a political and business coalition, and even more to communicate the arguments effectively. How do you see the role of the Liberal Democrats in driving this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will have more to say on this in the autumn. I should leave that there as a taster. But needless to say, one of the things I think many of us found frustrating during all of the Brexit years was that business was not more vocal. And when I spoke to business leaders then, as I do now, the overriding message that I got from business leaders was that they said, well, look, we're not the politicians. You're the politicians, so you do the politics. We're business people, we just want to do business. And there's a tension there. And I don't entirely know what the answer is, but there is a tension between people in business who overwhelmingly see day in, day out, the challenges of the botched Brexit deal gives them and the economy and growth and all those opportunities, and encouraging enough of them to put their heads above the parapet to make the case. Because again, at a time when trust in politics is low, trust in business leaders is actually often quite high, and they are often seen as being more impartial. Whether or not they are is another question, but they often are seen as being more impartial and experts in their area. And therefore, it is vital that we can bring together enough business leaders who overwhelmingly were prepared to make that case. And I think all I'll say for now is watch this space.
Intriguing. Okay, we have one more question there.
Yeah, hi there, Kerry Martin from City UK. Obviously, our industry wasn't covered in the Leaders Summit, but there were benefits such as the e-gates and also the dialogue on mobility. How will you keep this government's feet to the fire on delivering on them, and also make sure the ambition doesn't plateau?
Yeah. Well, we'll do our very best. We are a party of constructive opposition. So where the government has signalled an intention to do something, we will just continue to push them to go further. I do think that when it comes to services, as I said before, it's not something that's very high up in the public debate, but I think, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it does mean that the government is able to make progress without causing, too many fireworks to go off. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But in terms of e-gates and the mobility scheme, I mean, the overwhelming polling suggests that people think a mobility scheme is a good idea. They just think it's a good idea. And I hope that the government will stop looking over its shoulder at those who will always attack it, no matter what they do or say, and show some leadership and demonstrate that it is a good thing that will benefit people of this country. And if they can demonstrate that quite soon, then the proof is in the eating of the pudding, and people will be able to see evidence that a stronger relationship is a good thing.
Good. Right. 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
And Raphael Baer has asked whether he can have a second bite at the cherry as well, since John Kerr, I most unwisely allowed to have a second go. Raphael, if we've still got you.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
here. Hi there. Yeah. First of all, I didn't introduce myself before. Raphael Baer, Guardian columnist. I'll be as quick as I can. Generally, I tend to the view that there's no such thing as a Brexit benefit, but people in the sort of AI digital technology space who are generally pro-European do try to persuade me that this is one area, because the EU over-regulates and doesn't necessarily understand the sophistication of the challenges, and London in particular, but the UK are actually very well equipped, where actually the UK, there is a potential Brexit benefit. I'd be interested to know your view on that.
So I think that were we still in the EU, there would be an even bigger benefit, which is that we would be able to demonstrate leadership in this debate. And that could be the same said for anything in particular. And when we were members of the EU, this is a slight tangent, but when we were members of the EU, the UK was one of the strongest advocates for free trade. And I know this from my time when I worked in the Commonwealth. And there were small countries around the world who, small island states and Commonwealth countries that looked to the UK as their voice within the EU. And I think were we to be in the EU still, this is a space where we could temper some of the over-regulation by the EU, but make sure that there is more regulation and more targeted, effective regulation than there is in the US. So I personally would not, I recognise that it is an area where we perhaps are taking a different approach that is more beneficial to one particular sector. Do I think the sector would benefit more from us making sure that the whole of Europe was following our approach and showing leadership in that space? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, 100% right. And having said that, the other side, according to your earlier comment, financial services, I chair quite a large private financial services company. Everyone you talk to, the level of increased regulation, increased red tape is one of the biggest threats to our intrinsic location, language, educational capabilities. Not helped by whatever you want to think, non-dom, school, all sort of things aimed at sort of saying we don't really want you. So there's that side of it we can handle, stop shooting ourselves in the foot and get on, as you said, I think, Daisy, quicker, but realistically on the things we can do to improve people's lives and the economy, because there's no other way out of this problem. other than grow the economy somehow at some point.
Okay, I know you gave us only an hour,
Afraid so.
which we have taken. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, thank
It's been
you.
really fascinating. I wish you every success in pushing the government to go farther and faster. Well, we hope these things. We will be doing an event at the Liberal Democrat conference in the autumn. In fact, I shall no doubt be approaching you and others to speak at that. But it's been a great pleasure, and please join me in thanking you.